Roaring Twenties in America was a time period where there was a surge in economy and change in social constructs. Instances like the women's suffrage law being passed, as well as prohibition laws limiting the use of alcohol. The golden age for African American writers, artists, and musicians, also known as the Harlem Renaissance, where they could represent their culture through music in America. Musicians like Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington were well known. May 19th, 1925, marks the date of Malcolm X's birth. Same year in America, a court case infringed upon rights of the First Amendment when a teacher reviewed the theory of evolution. And then the state of Tennessee prohibited the teachings because of it. It was contrary to biblical beliefs, as well as fining him $100. This is important because this shows how America reacts to people going against the programming that they set in place and beliefs that they have. As well as, during the 1920s, white supremacist groups like the KKK were revived due to the conflict of the influx of immigrants and African Americans in North and Midwest areas of America. This led to the horrific lynching and oppression of black people. Because of the influence the KKK had over many white civilians, his father was also a victim of murder by white people. Malcolm developed a bias towards white people from a young age. At the young age of 14 years old, his mother was instituted into an insane asylum, and because of that, he resorted to crime. With no other way out, he did petty crimes like drug dealing and was arrested in 1946 for robbery. Through the 6-year period of Malcolm being in prison at a young age, he made his first discovery of Islam. He later joined the Nation of Islam. Malcolm only started making speeches until he was 35 years old, and for only a 5-year period before the date of his assassination in 1965.
Hey, we are oppressed. We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy.
Through the impact of his speeches, Malcolm X garnered support from Martin Luther King, Muhammad Ali, and other black leaders like Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam. Much like the Black Panther Party, Malcolm X advocated for armed self-defense and separatism between white people and black people. But Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were at odds because while Malcolm X advocated for separatism, Martin Luther King advocated for a nonviolent civil rights movement to achieve integration. As well as, Malcolm realized the oppression that black people faced was beyond just physically. Mentally, they were taught to hate their African facial features, to hate their hair type, to hate themselves, and to hate other people of their own race.
The white man pays Reverend Martin Luther King, subsidizes Reverend Martin Luther King, so that Reverend Martin Luther King can continue to teach the Negroes to be defenseless. That's what you mean by nonviolent. Be defenseless. Be defenseless in the face of one of the most cruel beasts that has ever taken the people into captivity. That's this American white man. And they have proved it throughout the country by the police dogs and the police clubs. 100 years ago, they used to put on a white sheet and use a bloodhound against Negroes. Today, they have taken off the white sheet and put on police uniforms. They've traded in the bloodhounds for police dogs, and they're still doing the same thing. And just as Uncle Tom, back during slavery, used to keep the Negroes from resisting the bloodhound or resisting the Ku Klux Klan by teaching them to love their enemy or pray for those who use them despitefully. Today, Martin Luther King is just a 20th century or modern Uncle Tom or a religious Uncle Tom who is doing the same thing today to keep Negroes defenseless in the face of attack that Uncle Tom did on the plantation to keep those Negroes defenseless.
Because of the unknown fact that many African American inmates in the South were used for hard labor and weren't fed well, neither even had homes. Malcolm X viewed Martin Luther King as a 20th century Uncle Tom because of the harsh conditions they were going through. With cases like Emmett Till showing up, where he was convicted of whistling at a white woman, and as they retaliated, they killed and mangled Emmett Till's body. With the result of the court case, the man who killed him got off free.
In a struggle that means we sit down and do nothing, that there's a great deal of difference between non-resistance to evil and non-violent resistance. Non-resistance leaves you in a state of stagnant passivity and deadened complacency, wherein non-violent resistance means that you do resist in a very strong and determined manner.
Martin Luther King's argument was that the correct way to respond to the injustices against African American people in America was with a civil and passive movement.
King is to give Negroes a chance to sit in a segregated restaurant beside the same white man who had brutalized them for 400 years. The goal of Dr. Martin Luther King is to get Negroes to forgive the people who have brutalized them for 400 years by lulling them to sleep and making them forgetting what those whites have done to them. But the masses of black people in America today don't go for what Martin Luther King is putting down as you.
But the oppression of African American men, women, and children during the Civil Rights Movement didn't end there. Many of them were beat and bruised, as well as sprayed by hoses while attending speeches.
Or taught. It is a time to act in the Congress, in your state and local legislative body, and above all, in all of our daily lives. It is not enough to pin the blame on others, to say this is a problem of one section of the country or another, or to deplore the facts that we face. A great change is at hand, and our task, our obligation, is to make that revolution, that change, peaceful and constructive for all. Those who do nothing.
Because Malcolm X was teaching black people to stand up to the oppression that they were receiving, organizations like COINTELPRO in America were set in place to assassinate Malcolm X because of his invigorating speeches that uplifted black people to fight. Malcolm knew his people needed leaders that objectively dealt with the racial discrimination they were facing. He was one of the first civil rights leaders to push true change in the social constructs of America, which garnered respect from many, and he would go down in history as a true civil rights leader. But the FBI had different plans. The FBI organization COINTELPRO, aka Counterintelligence Program, is a series of covert illegal activity like surveillance, infiltration, and disruption of domestic political parties, including the assassination of leaders, psychological warfare against mostly nonviolent individuals like the elite members of Black Panther Party, Nation of Islam, and civil rights leaders. The leader of this operation was J. Edgar Hoover. He ordered his people to expose, disrupt, misdirect, and discredit or neutralize any political party that the FBI deemed too subversive. He gained commission from the President Eisenhower and then from President Kennedy to conduct this operation. Kennedy personally signed off on a plethora of covert projects that used tactics like the IRS to audit people and forge documents to misinform groups from the inside. Civil rights activists like Dr. T.R.M. Howard was critical on the FBI for the inaction on cases like hate crimes against African Americans, as well as the murders of Emmett Till and George Washington Lee. This is when they started to target groups like the Black Panther Party and the Nation of Islam, which Malcolm X was a member of. Leaked documents on this operation confirmed that COINTELPRO targeted leaders like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Sullivan was a man ordered by Hoover to discredit black leaders and civil rights groups, stated that Martin Luther King is the most dangerous Negro of the future. They tapped into phones of hotels that he would stay at, trying to find information against him that would lead him to kill himself, which is the most common reason stated when people with power die, and is a well-known fact to be the opposite. Research found that a suicide note was sent to King, pressuring him to off himself because of the evidence of him having an affair. The FBI would then infiltrate the Nation of Islam and spread misinformation to spark conflict between Malcolm and the leader of the Nation of Islam, which would later to be the case of Malcolm being assassinated by members of the Nation of Islam. But the FBI denied any direct involvement, which would go against their known and conducted behavior.